I'm speaking via Zoom today with Ashely Capps, founder of AC Entertainment and the Big Ears Festival, which is an annual event that normally takes place at the end of March in various venues throughout downtown Knoxville, featuring avant-garde music and music that, simply put, doesn't fit into a box or a category. And normally around this time of year, Ashely, we get together to chat about the exciting lineup reveal for next year's festival. But of course, there's nothing normal about life these days, particularly when talking about live performance. So get us up to date on the state of the Big Ears Festival. What is your tentative plan for next year?
One of the lessons that we've certainly learned from the pandemic is how to be flexible and how to pivot to a new plan when you're forced to do so. Originally, of course, we had to cancel Big Ears last March, 2 weeks before the festival, because that's when the reality of the pandemic started coming down. I think it's taken weeks for any of us to really absorb the full impact of what it was going to mean. And so in early April, we optimistically planned for the festival to return in March 2021. And sadly, in the past few weeks, it's become increasingly evident that what we had hoped to do in March, which was a much more expansive version of the festival, we were actually going to go to 2 weekends in the hope of making up for the 2020 festival a bit and being able to reprogram a lot of the artists that were scheduled to play. But obviously, the pandemic's had other ideas, and we've realized for a while that we were at best going to have to scale back. And then I think in the last few weeks, it became evident that there was no way to do a festival of any kind in March. So now we are planning to do scaled back versions of the festival in late spring and then in either late summer or early fall. We're hoping actually to do two of these scaled down versions. It's going to depend, of course, on factors that we don't completely control. One of the things that we do like about moving to the later time period is that it will enable us to expand our venues to incorporate some of Knoxville's great outdoor spaces and do things a little bit differently. So that's where we're at this particular point, and we've got some plans that are very much in the works. A lot of conversations with artists. Some artists have already committed, and we're sitting here just hoping that by the time late January or early February rolls around, that we can confidently move forward with the late May plans that we have.
Will these rescheduled springtime performances include some of the artists that you had originally booked for March?
Yes. And actually, some of the artists that we had originally booked for March of 2020, because much of what we had scheduled for 2021 were artists who had been scheduled to play in 2020. Although there's some really exciting new programs that had already been booked for 2021. So some of those are in the works for the May 2021 festival too.
And so will tickets be more limited, audience sizes smaller?
Well, we're weighing all of that. I think that the festival itself will certainly be smaller. So that means we will be selling less tickets. And that's not merely because of the pandemic. I think it's a practicality in just terms of how fast people are going to be able to move once we start being able to actually have events again. So rather than try to push the envelope too hard, we thought we would scale back and do something maybe about half the size. And so we'll use half as many venues. We probably won't program anything quite so intensely. So sometimes, the Bijou, for instance, might have 5 performances during the course of a single day. And this time we might do like 2 or 3. And so we'll open up the whole experience a lot. And like I said, do some things outdoors that are appropriate for the outdoors, and that will be fun. And just try to make the most of a new situation.
Well, in the meantime, the Big Ears organization has launched a streaming series. Several performances have already taken place. Tell us about what's coming up in the streaming series.
Well, streaming was something that we were slow to embrace, to tell you the truth, because initially I had a reaction to it that's not dissimilar to what I think many people had, which was thanks, but no thanks. The live concert experience is intrinsically social. It's about people coming together. It's about the interaction between an artist on stage and the audience. And there's a lot of connections between people that make that experience what it is. It's not just being able to watch someone perform music. But then I started seeing artists doing things that were interesting. They weren't merely trying to recreate the concert experience for people, but they were actually finding ways to embrace new possibilities that the medium offered. And that really intrigued me. And so we started having some conversations. And in late August, we launched our first concert, which was live from the Bijou with R.B. Morris and his band. No audience, of course. And through the conversations with RB and thinking, how do we make this work? And from an artist standpoint, it's like, what do you do when there's no applause? You finish playing this thing and you're used to this immediate feedback from the audience. What do you do when it's not there? And so we decided to put the band in the round on the stage of the Bijou, and so that they're working with each other, much like you might do in a recording studio. And then we put the audience in the middle of the band. So you're actually on stage with the band, almost like a fifth member of that band, and completely in the center of the entire experience. We also love this because we realized that a lot of venues, like these historic theaters, like the Bijou, one of the most spectacular ways to experience them visually is from the stage. And the audience doesn't necessarily get to have that experience. So that added a new dimension to the streaming, in that you had the atmosphere and this, just extraordinary ambience of a theater in a way that you would not necessarily experience it as a member of the audience in a normal concert. So this sent us down a certain path of just trying to do some unique streaming experiences that didn't try to recreate the normal concert experience, but tried to create a unique experience for the audience and for the artist in their own right. So that's kind of where we're at. And it's gradually expanded. We've gotten a lot of incredible feedback from people. The Bad Plus came to Knoxville strictly to record at the Bijou because they've played there before, obviously, and loved the venue. And we were able to capture a similar type experience with them. We actually have part two of that, since they were going to the trouble of traveling from New York and Minneapolis and Philadelphia to Knoxville. We're like, well, let's not just do one show, let's do two. So we've got a second set with them that will be streaming on December the 4th. And then we've worked with Lonnie Holly, Marisa Anderson, William Tyler, and Yasmin Williams, who also came to Knoxville to record this very special session at Log Haven, which is, really digs deep into the roots of traditional American guitar music. It's a very special show, too. Mm-hmm. So, in a sense, I guess you said we're just looking for new ways to fulfill the mission of Big Ears, which is really to connect artists and audiences and have these experiences that are hopefully meaningful to both. And this seemed like one way to do it. And the interesting thing also for me is I think we're going to continue doing it. As we've discovered some of the possibilities inherent in streaming, I do think that this is a facet of what the Big Ears Festival does that could continue even after it becomes possible for us to do the real festival again with a live audience in attendance. So it's a new idea, and it's been really educational and interesting to explore it.
So you see these streaming events going on throughout the year, even when the festival returns?
Potentially. I think they also have an opportunity to introduce festival audiences before the festival itself takes place to more about what the artist is about and what they're up to, what a particular performance might be about. So it could offer a really interesting and intriguing opportunity to add some depth and some preparation, if you will, for the experience, especially if someone's working on presenting a new work or something.
Hmm. And I love that you are continuing to use Knoxville venues for these streaming events. So you're continuing to show off Knoxville to the rest of the world.
Well, that's certainly part of our objective. Although we've explored some other things too. We had Mark Rebo and Ceramic Dog played from the Brooklyn Bridge on the rooftop of St. Anne's Warehouse, and that was one of our streaming things. That was pretty awesome. And we've been in conversations with some artists that are based in Berlin and Chicago and London and elsewhere about potentially doing programs from there. So we're not completely 100% you have to do this from Knoxville. That's just not very practical right now. But whenever it is possible, we're thrilled to do that. And we got some other amazing locations that we found. People have turned us on to some incredible spaces that as this continues, it'll be fun to explore those possibilities too.
Now, I know one streaming event that you have going on right now, I believe that's not being filmed in Knoxville, is the Norwegian Jazz Festival. Tell me a little bit about that. And it's a multi-day event, correct?
Well, yes, it's actually 15 performances, each about an hour long. They're filmed in Oslo at a really beautiful venue. And we're presenting them as 7 double bills and then one evening with in the case of Tord Gustafsson. And yeah, we're about 2/3 of the way through it, I guess, at this point. They're really beautifully recorded, beautifully filmed performances by great artists, many of whom have performed at big ears. So this was originally created by the Norwegians for a European audience. And then they asked us if we would be interested in being their North American promoter for this series. And we agreed to do that. And I'm really glad we did because several of the performances have just really been beautiful and special shows. I think the solo piano concert by Boogie Vesseltoff, that was the first show that we did. It was right after the election. And he did this concert that had, it might sound a little cheesy because it was like these improvisations based on like Blowing in the Wind and Let It Be. But, people were just blown away. It was just so soul enriching after what had been a really difficult and trying week for everyone. And there's been a number of them like that. People have been very effusive in their response. So much so that I think we're going to try. We'll be announcing this in a couple of weeks, but I think we're going to rebroadcast the entire thing over like an 8-day period during the holidays. We're going to do an encore, so to speak, because I think the quality of them has taken people by surprise. And so there's people joining in late and they're like, oh God, I can't believe that I missed this show and that show. So we're going to give everyone one more chance to see it again, which we'll announce in early December.
Excellent, excellent. Now I'm going to show my ignorance here about jazz music, which I will totally own, but I didn't even know about the genre of Norwegian jazz. So what is Norwegian jazz?
Well, in a nutshell, Norwegian jazz is jazz played by Norwegians. It's interesting because Scandinavia has always been a hotbed of interest in jazz. And in fact, a lot of great American jazz artists first found a really substantial amount of appreciation for their music in Scandinavia. And many jazz artists even moved to Norway and Sweden and Finland and Denmark because of the appreciation that their music received. And because of that, a lot of young Norwegian musicians grew up really influenced by the American jazz tradition. And then gradually, some of these artists themselves became, some of the foremost jazz artists in the world. Like probably the best known is Jan Garbarek, who first started recording for ECM back in the early 1970s and is really an international superstar within the world of jazz. And ECM Records, who, of course, Big Ears did a 50-year celebration of the legacy of that label. And that label was also very involved in giving a voice to this new hotbed of music. But it is unique. It's not merely an attempt to recreate American jazz. I think that the Norwegians have really they've gone into their own culture. I think there's something very distinctive about Scandinavian folk music in general. And I think they've used the Scandinavian folk traditions in the ways that American jazz artists use the blues to give a foundation to creating something that's really stands apart and is unique. And the musicians are just among the best in the world.
Something that I've been thinking about recently is almost every arts organization has had to get creative during this time of COVID to come up with events and ways of sharing performances that don't involve a live audience, or at least not large live audiences. Do you foresee any permanent changes to the performing industry as a result of COVID?
Well, the positive thing about COVID is that it has forced people to get more creative. And I think there's some nice things coming out of that. And, just what we've learned from streaming and from watching other people stream has opened up this whole new world that I think is a really significant way for artists and their audiences to interact. And I don't mean simply by someone being on the other side of a computer screen watching a performance, but sometimes there's a direct and very personal seeming interaction between artists and the audience that I think is significant. On a negative side, I'm certainly concerned about the longevity and livelihood of a lot of our venues and a lot of unsung heroes in this business, your stagehands, your technical people, your ushers at the theaters, and the livelihoods of those who are needed to keep clubs and small theaters and larger theaters and venues just operational and functional is concerning. And of course, the livelihood of artists themselves is concerning. So I think there are a lot of changes. I cannot predict what they're going to be. I think the road back is going to be slow, and there will be some things that will be potentially different forever. But hopefully there will be a lot of really great lessons learned from this, and a lot of the changes will ultimately be very positive, even though in the short term, even positive change can sometimes be very painful.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Let's hope that life can get back to normal, whatever that means, sooner than later. And
whatever normal means,
yeah.
Yes. I think, certainly the news about the vaccine is really positive. I think there's a lot of news about very rapid testing that is positive for some level of events to be able to come back, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm.
Most optimistic case, sometime middle of 2021 before we start seeing a lot of significant activity return. But hopefully by then.
Yeah. And hopefully audiences will be hungry for that live performance experience. I know I will be.
Yeah, I think it means a lot to people. There's a spiritual dynamic to it. There's a social dynamic to it. And I think it's part of how we define ourselves as humans. And so, yes, I think it will be embraced when it comes back. At the same time, I think a lot of people are going to be justifiably very cautious.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Ashely Capps, so great to talk with you today. Thanks
Great
for speaking with
you.
me.
I almost feel like we're sitting across the table from you.
I mean, almost. My phone is positioned just a few feet to the right of where you would normally be sitting. But yeah, hope you're doing well. And again, thanks for talking with me. A conversation with Ashely Capps, founder of the world-renowned Big Ears Festival, getting us up to date on tentative plans for next year's festival, as well as a deeper look at their current streaming series. More information about the Big Ears streaming series can be found on their website at bigearsfestival.org or on their Facebook page.